Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, our weekly look at the world of business and finance. This week it's Egypt and its options post-uprising. Perhaps it should look north as we examine the successful Turkish model of politics, economy and democracy. Also, behind the abaya, literally, we take a look at the growing beauty industry in the Middle East. And 200 years of American capitalism could fall into German hands, a deal that would create the world's biggest stock exchange operator. So a big focus on Egypt again this week, but really widening it out to the Middle East as a whole. What works, what doesn't, what lessons could be learnt. Egypt, like Tunisia before it, has seen an uprising of extraordinary proportions, one which will require a major social and economic overhaul when the dust finally settles. And it could do a lot worse than looking at Turkey for that overhaul. Regarded with distaste for many years, Turkey's rapidly regained ground in recent years, in part because its booming economy has escaped the malaise of other Middle Eastern countries, but also because Turkey appears, so far, to have married democracy and Islam in a way that's kept most of its citizens happy and economically sound. Let's begin with this report from Anita McNaught in Istanbul.
Last summer, Middle Eastern tourists thronged Istanbul, drawn not only by the scenery but by the popularity of Turkish TV soap operas and Turkey's kudos for its support of Palestine and criticism of Israel. A survey just released of 8 of these countries shows Turkey's now their most popular holiday destination. But the bigger finding was political. Interviews in Egypt, Iran, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine, Saudi Arabia and Syria showed that 2/3 of 2,267 people surveyed thought that Turkey could be a role model for the region, and more than 3/4 thought Turkey should be playing a bigger role. It's the second year Turkish think tank TESEV have done this survey. All the indicators are up in Turkey's favour.
The reasons are, I think, very much related with economy, politics, and also the cultural visibility of the country. It is, I think, the combination of Islam and democracy which plays the major role in their perception.
What Turkey is for the people in the Middle East, in the Arab lands mainly, is what they aren't and what they aspire to be.
Turkey's rising prosperity, defiance of the global economic crisis, booming trade with the region and steady spread of wealth across all classes speaks loudly to a Middle East of bread riots and mass unemployment. Turkey has no oil or gas, but average incomes tripled under the 8 years of AKP rule. In Egypt, by comparison, they rose $5 in 2 decades, according to IMF figures. Cengiz Jandar, who knows the Middle East well, says its people have lost all faith in their autocratic regimes.
There is a correlation in their subconscious that poverty, corruption, and lack of democracy are identical, while any prosperous country or economically thriving country is also a democratically ruled country.
Turkey's president last visited Egypt in July 2010. Abdullah Gül has been warning Middle Eastern regimes to make democratic reforms in widely publicized speeches since 2003. Back then, this was dismissed as Turkey doing America's bidding. Not anymore. Turkey has won over the Arab street. 3/4 in the survey saying Turkey had a major role to play in achieving peace in the Middle East. That used to be Egypt's job. For the past week, Turkey's Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan has repeatedly said that Hosni Mubarak's administration needs to listen to their people. Finally, the Egyptian government had heard enough. Cairo summoned the Turkish ambassador to object and sent its ambassador to appear on Turkish TV to tell Ankara to back off. There must be no interference, he said. It's up to Egyptians to decide when and what will be done. Turkey's most powerful message is embodied, not explicit, and it's been picked up by newly empowered opposition leaders all around the region. Returning from exile to Tunisia, Ennahda leader Rashid Ghannouchi said his party was more like Turkey's AKP than the Muslim Brotherhood. But the Brotherhood in Egypt are invoking the AKP as well. Turkey's AKP was once considered too Islamic, but human rights have also improved in Turkey under their government.
Turkey model, it is self-evidential fact of the compatibility of democracy with Islam. Even the Islamists, when they are engaged in a democratic governance, abiding by the rules of democracy, they transform.
Contradicting Western and regional voices which warn of an Islamist takeover when the old regimes give way, Turkey's example has been the triumph of pragmatism over extremism.
All right, so let's look at some analysis of Turkey's example and the wider Egypt issue. Hatem Al-Karanshawi is a Dean of the Faculty of Islamic Studies at Qatar Foundation. He spent over 20 years as a finance professor at the American University in Cairo. He is also a former board member of the Egyptian Central Bank, which makes him ideally placed to talk about Egypt's finances. Just returned to Doha from a trip to Cairo. I caught up with him to get his take on events there. Dr. Hatem, thank you so much for your time today. Let's go back before the protests started, before the unrest started. Was it something that was always going to happen? When people don't see economic growth for so long, whilst the rest of their country apparently is growing, was this just something that was always going to happen?
Yes. I mean, there have been a lot of indicators regarding the people below the poverty line, the people around that, the rising unemployment among youth, which is, as I said, the most active and dangerous element. We have an educated youth particularly, it was very high. At the same time, the sort of the widening gap within income distribution. Added to this, what I said we traditionally call the revolution of aspirations, where you see the pressure of the availability of some of the items, which intimidates a lot of people, why quite a good number of people, when we talk about even 20% of the population, that's coming to around 16 million people. That's are deprived from so many things. And there have been years and years of talking about trickling down of the growth rates, the high growth rates achieved, which people couldn't see.
But were any of these things actually recognized as problems?
Recognized, yes. I think there was continuous talk about this in the opposition press on the various, as I said, demonstrations that have taken place. The government verbally, and sometimes they took actions, but they were not sufficient, they were not enough. That is a big, and the evidence is that, as I said, these numbers have been growing in there. And again, the unemployment problem have been growing. So there was recognition, but it was not enough. Actions, again, were concentrated very much about the adherence of the model of Washington consensus and continuous elimination of the role of the state in the economy and in the social aspects and so on. A lot of talk about subsidies and so on, and the pressing that we have to look at it based on the results of international organization, advice of the international organizations. And all this, again, the sort of the model simply is not working. It has been proven and proven and proven that results in devastating results.
So all told, what sort of damage do you think has been done to Egypt's economy? I mean, you can put a monetary figure on what was lost during the protests and while banks and markets were shut down, but the toll on the economy, the toll on Egypt's reputation as a business center for the Middle East.
Definitely there have been a damage. I mean, there's no question about it. However, a sort of thing in the medium, I wouldn't even say in the long run, if things turn it the right way into a more democratic state, I think that situation could be recovered very quickly.
So you don't think people, investors looking at Egypt now or Tunisia or elsewhere in the Middle East, they won't be thinking, don't really want to put our money there just now?
It's a question of the degree of risk that you accept. The fundamentals of the Egyptian economy, which attracts investment, once again domestic or foreign, remains the same. It is the economic resources, it is the geographical location, it is the population, the growing, the educated manpower. I mean, there is a number of essential factors that's there. It will take, of course, a period of time to adjust. I wouldn't worry very much about the stock market losses and the sort of the ranking of the economy by international rating agencies and so on. We have seen a lot of this during the international financial crisis.
But would you worry about the idea of contagion? If you're talking international financial crisis, that was what we saw all across Europe, the fear that each next country would fall into the same trap. Could we see that again across the Middle East? There was enough surprise to see it in Tunisia, certainly a lot of surprise to see in Egypt. Where next?
Who knows? I think it's already there are signs in some other parts, not necessarily to state-specific countries in the Middle East, but it is having an effect. It depends on two things: how the governments in these countries will be quick enough to recognize that the time of a change is here, not coming, and they take the necessary steps to that, and what's exactly the level of people's aspiration. But already a number of governments in the Middle East have started taking measures. If these measures are satisfactory, then it's about effect on the region. Yes, it did, and it will continue.
There is talk out there at the moment about a so-called Turkish model for economies and powers in this part of the world. Certainly Turkey's done well. It's had something like 5% growth as long as Prime Minister Erdogan's been in power. Is there something to be said for the way that the Turks govern and grow their economies?
Well, I think it's a good, successful model. I mean, like any other model experience, it has its pros and cons, but I believe that both politically and economically it have proven something. I mean, the rates of growth that have been achieved over the last 10 years in Turkey is certainly a good example. And the movement, democratic movement there, have been, I think, going in the right direction. Again, like any other model, you have your here and there question and issues and so on, but the dynamism itself is there. And the economic penetration in the region, again, for the Turks, is evident.
I'm reading here the Turkish ambassador to the US saying, Turkey is stable because we raised the living standards of the people, we met the demands of the people. I mean, it's a simple idea, isn't it? A government looking after its own people.
Your first question, I said that the sort of the thing that the people have waited long enough for the so-called trickle down, which is a very outdated thing, but unfortunately, some people still believe in that, some of the policymakers and economists, which is, to say the least, is ridiculous. And again, the role of government is essential, particularly in our parts of the world. And I believe it's everywhere in the world, but our parts of the world is essential. There's no real development. Forget about growth rates and figures about stock market and flow of foreign investment and so on. The real development, where people's standard could be lifted up, where people will feel committed to what's going on and they are part of it, actually would require an active, positive role of the state in the economy.
Final thought from you, Dr. Hattem, just to bring it back to Egypt. When you look at the country now, when you look at what it's been through, are you confident in two ways? One, that not too much damage has been done, and two, that enough lessons have been learnt, that there does have to be some sort of change now for this country to grow properly and for people to actually see the growth?
I think it's have been proven and evident to everyone who really cares about even staying in power or continuing the thing. It's for the country, I think it's more than obvious now. Once again, and what have been demonstrated, that simply you cannot cater for the few and left the people out. I mean, it's very important to offer incentives for the investor. It's essential. But in the same time, not at the expense of others. And there's no conflict by definition. I mean, you don't have to create that conflict because there's always a room. So you can balance this with that. But without this, I think the lesson have been demonstrated very clearly. Tunisia, and now in Egypt, and in other parts of the world. And there are so many countries in the world that have the same situation. And once again, it is time to act on that reality, not an assumption.
Dr. Hattem, fascinating talking to you. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
We're going to look at the issue of corruption now, and Hosni Mubarak and his family have long been accused of stashing billions of dollars in the Swiss and British banks. Of course, there is no way of definitively proving such claims, but corruption is one of the many reasons for this uprising in Egypt and across the wider Middle East. Dr. Christopher Davidson is an expert on Middle Eastern economics at Durham University. He's joined us for our Dubai specials in the past. He joins us right now from Newcastle. Christopher, thank you for coming back. You know, we use this word corruption as a sort of catch-all phrase, but how would you actually describe or classify this apparent corruption within the Egyptian regime?
Well, I think within Egypt's regime, we almost have a corporate tithing system. It's a little bit medieval in some ways, not dissimilar to elsewhere in the Arab world, in fact, where if you have any kind of economic liberalisation takes place, any foreign money or investment trying to come in, those who are very well placed at the top of the pyramid, if you excuse the expression, the regime elite, have the golden opportunity to make the most of that by setting themselves up as sponsors for these foreign companies. In many cases, of course, that leads to a sleeping partner situation where the local partner doesn't really have to do very much. They just take a significant chunk of the company's stock.
Yeah, but is there anything wrong, per se, with this sponsorship idea? I mean, presumably you're not just going to have foreigners coming in, investing, reaping all the rewards. The idea of them having to have a sponsor should work. Or is it just that the implementation of that sponsorship is the thing which isn't working?
Yes, exactly. There are alternatives to the sponsorship system. You can have free zones, which Egypt has begun setting up as well, much like the Gulf states. But as you say, yes, the problem is really the people at the top. So if you have a government structure and a regime which is still very patriarchal, where you have all of these connections to the top and need to know the right person and a crony system in place, it doesn't really mean that the right entrepreneurs or people who should be involved in these businesses are able to actually able to make the deals. Instead, it has to be senior members of the regime, even family members of the president, who have to be involved.
Okay, seeing as you mentioned that level of the pyramid, the high level of the pyramid, if you like, any thoughts on what Hosni Mubarak might have been worth, him and his family?
Well, I think there's no real answer to this. There have been lots of speculative figures given in the media over the last week, ranging from $20 billion to an incredible $70 billion, which would actually make him the richest man in the world. I'm not sure it's quite as high as that. I think if we did have a figure or a proper investigation was possible, this would mean the very clever and well-paid men that the Mubarak family have been paying to store and secrete their wealth very carefully across the world haven't been doing their job.
So then the up to $70 billion question then is, can any of this money actually be claimed back? I mean, if Hosni Mubarak does have all this ill-gotten money as it's widely believed, is there any chance of actually seeing it again?
Well, this is an excellent question. I think there is a chance. Recently we had a ruling in Switzerland over the former Haitian president, Baby Doc, who had tried to get access to funds in a Swiss numbered account, which the Swiss ruled he wouldn't get, given that he was an ousted former dictator of Haiti. So the monies were frozen and will be returned to the state. I think in Egypt's case this could happen too. That said, I think Mubarak will probably have his wealth spread extremely wide in different countries, not just in bank accounts, but also in property in mature Western real estate, I would imagine, in Britain and America. It'd be very hard to recover all of these.
Okay, we're looking solely at Egypt, obviously. I wonder, though, how much it is a part of a wider Middle Eastern problem with the sorts of long-standing regimes which are in place, regimes which have a lot of money pretty much lining their pockets.
Yes, I don't think there's any difference between Egypt and the ruling elite in Egypt and the ruling elite in the Gulf states. I mean, you have monarchical presidencies and you have presidential monarchies, and there's not much in it, really. These are people who sit at the top of a patriarchal political system and a pyramid of wealth. And I think in that sense, there's not much difference. What the big difference is, perhaps between Egypt and elsewhere in the region, especially the Gulf states, is that the GDP per capita in Egypt is just so low that this wealth gap is that much more massive and noticeable in Egypt compared to Saudi Arabia or the Emirates, for example.
Christopher Davidson from Durham University joining us on Counting the Costs. Thank you. OK, let's look at other business news now. And in past decades, there have been numerous mergers and acquisitions of stock market operators. That includes, for example, the New York Stock Exchange's acquisition of Paris-based Euronext. This as they faced competition from electronic exchanges, plus investors shifting their money into emerging and developing nations. Now, according to Bloomberg, there have been almost $100 billion worth of deals in this sector, and now, after the peak of the crisis, the deals are back on. First, the London Stock Exchange agreed to buy Toronto-based TMX for about $3.2 billion. And hot on the heels of that deal, one that creates a market where $20 trillion of stock would change hands every year. That deal would see Deutsche Börse take over the New York Stock Exchange. In other words, the center of American capitalism could fall to the Germans.
I think that it opens up to markets that potentially we're not in, and I think that the size, the mere scale matches up to the potential of all markets.
A possible merger between the Euronext and the Deutsche Börse is welcomed by the investors and is welcomed by the stock exchange, because there are possibilities of an economic growth within the next couple of years, and we know that the growth was a main factor of concerns of the investors concerning Deutsche Börse and Euronext within the last couple of years.
Finally this week, another facet to Middle Eastern economies. Might seem a bit frivolous, but women in the wider Middle East region are spending more on hair and cosmetics per capita than almost anywhere else in the world. Topping the list is Saudi Arabia, followed on closely by Iran, both reporting more than $2 billion each in cosmetic sales last year alone. Sarah Barden has the story.
Beauty goes more than skin deep. Here in Doha, it's a booming industry, with salons like this one doing a roaring trade. Step beyond the veil, and when it comes to looking tip-top, there's not a hair left out of place. Colour treatments and nail care shot up 50% between 2009 and 2010. And with the world's highest per capita GDP and the average salary standing at around $88,000, cash is flowing freely.
It's very natural for an Arab woman to visit a salon at least once a week, if not more, to get her hair done and her makeup and her nails. Beauty's gone from a more conservative way of where customers have gone to villas and then sneaked off in their cars back home again, or they've had their treatments done at home. Now they're happy to go into a mall or to a hotel.
Big brands and luxury names. Those are what ladies here in the Middle East want to spend their money on. And with more than half the population under the age of 30, young people are leading the market trends.
5 years ago, we had to travel, to spend our money. Now we can spend it whenever we get it. So living here in Doha with all those new brands and stuff are actually helping us spend more.
A lot right now is the bags that matches the shoes and that matches the abaya. That's the biggest thing, and the accessories and the earrings and the shoes, it has to match. If you don't, you're on a different level.
Gender segregation and bans on many forms of public entertainment like mixed parties and nightclubs make family and female-only get-togethers critical for Qatari women. It's a chance to dress to impress mothers and relatives of eligible bachelors.
We cover our body, we cover our hair, but we still buy whatever we want. And we can also buy what's still popular. We just don't show it when we go shopping or stuff like that. We do it in when there are closed areas and it's just women, then we show.
One of the main reasons behind the Gulf nations' resistance to the credit crunch is that consumers here don't have the kind of high levels of personal debt seen in the West. Qataris don't have to pay for water, electricity or healthcare. So with no need to be frugal, the wealthy and well-to-do across the region can afford a lavish lifestyle. Mohammed Al-Baba is the manager of one of the Middle East's top suppliers of beauty products.
It's like food. Everybody wants to eat. They didn't make it as a superficial in life. They made it as an essential matter, to eat and to be beautiful.
Back at the mall, as the ladies contemplate their next purchase, they're also looking to their future. And with more and more women entering the job market and graduating from universities, there's all the more reason to keep up appearances. And when it comes to looking good, for such a small nation, Qatar is a land of big numbers.
Buy something, yeah.
Sarah Barden, Al Jazeera, Doha.
And that is just about it. Don't forget to get in touch, though. Twitter's the best way to do that. At AJ Counting Cost is where you'll find us. We put pointers to next week's show there. Plus, we'll happily take a question and suggestion if you've got it. Also, head to our website. Click the business tab at aljazeera.net/English. Follow the links to the Counting the Cost page. But that is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santa Maria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.